ringed planet Saturn. More than 100 times the mass of Earth, its metallic core lies beneath 80,000 kilometers of liquid hydrogen and helium. It's called a gas giant. Saturn is orbited by at least 62 moons, each unique, some with complex and dynamic environments. Our only detailed examination of the Saturnian system ended in 2017, when the Cassini probe was intentionally crashed into the planet's dense atmosphere to guard against accidental contamination of the moons. Viewed from Earth, Saturn's rings are visible, but not in any detail. They were thought to be solid, until mathematical analysis suggested they were orbiting particles. But how did they get there? And why was Saturn alone in having rings? In the early days of space research, Saturn was just too far away. Conventional rockets could only just reach Mars. In 1964, NASA realized that a space probe launched in 1977 could take advantage of a rare alignment of the outer planets to fly past all the gas giants. Using gravitational assistance from the planets, it would just be possible with the technology of the day. An ambitious new mission began to take shape. It was dubbed the Grand Tour. Two probes that were far in advance of anything yet attempted would be part of the Mariner series. Because no spacecraft had been sent beyond Mars, mission planners felt it would be wise to send two rudimentary advanced probes to Jupiter and Saturn to test the deep space environment. Researchers didn't know if it was even possible to cross the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. In 1972, Pioneer 10 was launched towards Jupiter, and the following year a twin, Pioneer 11, was sent to Saturn. Both craft passed by Jupiter and discovered that the electron radiation there was 10,000 times as strong as at Earth. This was a surprise to engineers at NASA, who had to modify the more sophisticated craft they were preparing for the Grand Tour. The probes, being built at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, were part of a program known as Mariner Jupiter-Saturn, but this was soon changed to the Voyager program. They were launched 16 days apart in late 1977, while Pioneer 10 was heading toward interstellar space, and Pioneer 11 was still 2 years away from Saturn. In 1979, as Pioneer 11 approached the ringed planet, it began sending back pictures far clearer than anything seen before. A new ring, the F ring, was observed for the first time. The craft flew by Saturn, passing beneath the rings. Mission planners were uncertain how broadly the ring particles spread. If there was a threat to the spacecraft, they were prepared to sacrifice Pioneer 11 to get a clear idea of the environment they would encounter with the following Voyager craft. The probe passed the rings safely and continued beyond Saturn into interstellar space. NASA received its last communication from the probe on the 24th of November 1995. The following Voyager 1 and 2 probes were very robust, designed to survive for a very long journey and with far greater technical capacity than the Pioneers. In late 1980, Voyager 1 approached Saturn. Although its high-resolution polarimeter had failed, it was still able to see a new ring, called the G ring, orbiting 100,000 kilometers above Saturn's cloud tops. For the first time, researchers could see how the rings moved. Uneven features within the rings were called spokes. They're transient and are thought to be particles lifted by an electrostatic charge. After such a long preparation, information was now coming into JPL at such a rapid rate that the planetary scientists were overwhelmed. Saturn's moons were of great interest. Voyager 1's path had been chosen because it would take it close to Titan, the solar system's second largest moon, and the only one to hold an atmosphere. But the images were disappointing because the thick atmosphere of methane and nitrogen was impenetrable. Voyager 1 now looped up above the solar system on a trajectory that would take it to interstellar space. As it looked back at Saturn, it captured one last image from a unique angle. It was almost 10 months before Voyager 2 neared Saturn. Its different path meant that it could continue on to Uranus and then to Neptune. Its high-definition camera was still working, and planetary researchers were expecting detailed pictures of the rings. They were not disappointed. The varying densities and spacing within the rings was more complex than anyone had expected. The rings are named for letters of the alphabet in the order that they were discovered. It became apparent that the rings had changed in the time since Voyager 1 had seen them. Though they stretch from 7,000 to 80,000 kilometers above Saturn's equator, their thickness is on average just 30 meters. The spacecraft also returned pictures of the moon Enceladus. Its cracked, uncratered surface was made of ice, below which is an ocean. Ultimately, Voyager 2 left Saturn. Unable to go into orbit, it sped on toward Uranus. It would be 23 years before another probe visited.
And liftoff of the Cassini spacecraft on a 30-mile trek to Saturn.
Launched in 1997, Cassini was a collaboration between NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Italian Space Agency. It would take more than 6 years to reach Saturn. Cassini was the biggest, most complex interplanetary spacecraft yet devised. Its 12 different instruments each had a dedicated team of research specialists on Earth to interpret the data it sent back. Its high-gain antenna was used for high-speed data relay back to Earth, but in what's called a ram maneuver, it was sometimes used as a shield to protect the spacecraft from debris impact, especially when crossing the plane of Saturn's rings. On the 1st of July 2004, it fired its engine to go into orbit around Saturn. It was designed not to fail. Beside its main engine was a backup, in case the primary engine did fail. It had 16 monopropellant thrusters, 8 prime, and 8 more, also as backups. In mission control at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the engineers could not know what was going on. The time delay and Cassini's disappearance behind Saturn meant that much of the telemetry was recorded for later replay back to Earth. The engine burn lasted for 106 minutes. Cassini was the first probe to employ a solid-state recorder, unlike the earlier Voyager craft that registered data on a mechanical tape recorder. Cassini's first orbit followed a highly elliptical path that would take it out past the moon Titan. This was important for two reasons. Its gravity would be necessary in modifying Cassini's course, so Saturn and its other moons could be observed from different perspectives. Secondly, Titan, with its dense atmosphere, was targeted as an area of major interest for the Cassini team. The European Space Agency had built a small craft called Huygens, attached to the side of Cassini. On its second approach to Titan, the Huygens probe was released. It was equipped with a heat shield, a parachute, and enough battery power to last for several weeks. Over a 20-day period, Huygens drifted for 4 million kilometers. It would transmit data back to the orbiting Cassini, which would later relay it to Earth. 3 days after separation, Cassini made a course correction that would prevent it colliding with Titan. As Huygens reached Titan's atmosphere, Cassini was coming around for its third close approach of the Moon, ready to receive signals from the lander. While it drifted to the surface of Titan, Huygens sampled the atmosphere and recorded images of the landscape. Pictures from beneath the clouds revealed low hills and channels cut by flowing liquid. There were few impact craters, and those that existed were heavily eroded. It was the first landing on a body in the outer solar system. Images from the surface showed weathered rocks made of water ice. What surprised everybody was that Titan is a geologically active world, where liquid ethane and methane, rather than water, have carved the features. As Cassini continued looping out around Titan, it used radar to map the Moon's surface, confirming the widespread distribution of hydrocarbon lakes. The probe discovered that rain fell on Titan, but it was a mixture of liquid ethane and methane. The Moon has weather and other erosive forces similar to Earth, but the chemistry is radically different.
Discover the past with exclusive history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians, all from History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to explore everything, from the wonders of ancient Pompeii and the mystery of the princes in the tower to the life of Anne Boleyn and D-Day. Sign up via the link in the description.
The small moon Enceladus drew attention to itself as the whitest, most reflective body in the solar system. Its surface shows cratering in the north, but the south has giant cracks known as tiger stripes. On Cassini's first loop past Enceladus, the magnetometer team noticed an odd deflection of Saturn's magnetic field, as though the small moon had an atmosphere. During its second pass, the team noticed the same phenomenon. They asked for the next traverse of Enceladus to pass much closer, so Cassini's course was modified to fly just 175 kilometers above the icy moon. The probe passed through a plume of water vapor emanating from the tiger stripes. It contained common salt. In all, Cassini made 24 swoops past Enceladus, with the closest approach flying just 25 kilometers above the surface. Each one of the probe's instruments gathered different evidence about the jets of water expelled through the cracks in the moon's south. On Mars, rovers have been combing the surface looking for traces of life, but Enceladus was flaunting remarkable signs. Gravitational analysis revealed a liquid ocean beneath the ice, and infrared detectors saw heat emanating from the cracks. As well as salt, the science team discovered traces of silica that can only dissolve in hot water. Hydrogen and organic compounds were also detected.
We know from Cassini that Enceladus has a global ocean, so you have water. We also know that there are organics coming out because they've been directly measured both in the gas and in the particles. We also know there's a source of energy. The South Pole was hotter than the rest of Enceladus. And then we found evidence that deep inside, there are hydrothermal vents on the seafloor of Enceladus. So these hydrothermal vents would supply the heat and the nutrients that could possibly support life.
With a diameter of 500 kilometers, Enceladus is just too small to sustain a hot core via radioactive decay. Gravitational squeezing by Saturn explains some of the heating, but the source of the high temperatures detected remains a mystery.
But not only is there liquid water underneath the surface, but there's organic material, there's a heat source. And you know, when people get excited about the potential for life elsewhere in the solar system, there are four things that you need. You need a heat source, you need liquid water, you need organic material, and you need those three things to be stable over some period of time so that life could potentially form. At Enceladus, we've got three. We're not sure about the stability over time yet.
In the Earth's deep oceans, hydrothermal vents provide the warmth and nutrition to support life. They may even have been important for the origins of life. Planetary biologists are speculating that the environment in the oceans of Enceladus may be the most likely place in the solar system to find some sort of extraterrestrial life. It took a while for Cassini to be in a position where backlighting from the sun allowed the imaging team to capture pictures of the plumes. Using a similar technique, the imaging team took this picture with Saturn directly between Cassini and the Sun. It reveals Saturn's E-ring, the hazy outermost ring that is usually very difficult to see. The E-ring is a result of the plumes from Enceladus and is constantly replenished by the saltwater eruptions. Saying that Saturn has 62 moons is misleading. Each particle within the ring system could be regarded as a moon. There are the inner large moons and the outer large moons. There are the shepherds that shape the rings. There are co-orbitals that exchange orbits. And there are even moons that orbit other moons. All are unique. During the Voyager missions, interest in the moons came as something of an afterthought, but for Cassini, close examination of the moons was planned from the beginning. Iapetus orbits Saturn beyond Titan. It was first observed in 1671 by Giovanni Cassini. He could see it as a dot of light to the west of Saturn, but could not see it when it should have been to the east. Iapetus has one bright face and one dark one. Because the moon is tidally locked to Saturn, it is always the dark face that leads as it orbits. One theory suggests that it sweeps up debris that spews from Phoebe, a more distant moon. Another feature of Iapetus has scientists baffled. A ridge along the equator stretches more than halfway around the moon. It's twice as high as Earth's tallest mountain. With Iapetus being just 1,500 kilometers across, the ridge gives Iapetus the appearance of a walnut. Very accurately directed bursts from Cassini's main engine allowed mission engineers to modify the probe's looping orbits so mission specialists could focus on various moons, different areas of the ring system, or different parts of Saturn itself. With gravitational assistance from the moons, particularly Titan, mission control were able to conserve fuel. The Cassini probe performed so well it received 2 mission extensions, but the fuel could not last forever. Planners had scheduled the most hazardous part of Cassini's mission for its final year at Saturn. Late in 2016, Cassini began a series of polar orbits that would take it close to the outer edge of the rings. In what mission specialists called grazing on the rings, the craft's mass spectrometer and its cosmic dust analyzer would sample particles and gases as it crossed the ring plane. In orbit 251, its first pass above Saturn's North Pole, it recorded the peculiar hexagonal storm that was first hinted at by the Voyagers. The storm, more than twice the diameter of Earth, maintains its hexagonal shape, but its color changed with the advance of summer. At its center is a cyclone, shown here in false color, with red indicating lower cloud and green higher cloud. Winds at its edge blow at 540 kilometers per hour. One part of Cassini's dual-technique magnetometer had stopped working early in the mission. Without it, the craft had to do roll maneuvers from time to time to calibrate the instrument. The spacecraft would make 20 ring-grazing orbits, with the work of its instruments mapped out to the second. As the Sun was almost directly behind the rings, Cassini looked for dust clouds. Something is reducing ring particles to fine powder. Cassini made a number of radio occultation observations. With the rings between the spacecraft and Earth, 3 radio signals of differing wavelengths were transmitted simultaneously, allowing the radio science team to build a profile of the ring particles. This false color image of the A ring, the outermost of the large bright rings, shows red for particles larger than 5 centimeters across. Green denotes particles smaller than 5 centimeters, with blue for particles smaller than 1 centimeter. The complex gravitational interaction between Saturn, its rings and its moons leads to gaps in very particular places. Before Cassini arrived, only 18 moons were known. That number has grown to 62. Prometheus acts as a shepherding moon, limiting the inner edge of Saturn's F-ring. Along with Pandora, which orbits outside the F-ring, the 2 moons keep the ring narrowly confined. In April 2017, Cassini's orbit was changed for the final phase of its mission. The probe would now loop inside the rings. Though it would ultimately mean burning up in Saturn's atmosphere, the information gathered from such close proximity to Saturn and its rings would give a fuller picture of the gas giant. It was decided that intentionally destroying Cassini was preferable to letting it drift without fuel, possibly contaminating one of the moons. Cassini's sensors began picking up a stream of ring particles raining down upon Saturn. A continuous shower of ice and dust particles are dragged toward the planet's equator by gravity, or at higher latitudes, charged ring particles spiral in along magnetic field lines. Every second, 10,000 kilograms of ring rain falls to the surface. At this rate, the rings will be completely gone in 100 million years. Researchers were surprised to discover an electric current flowing between the inner D ring and the upper atmosphere. Toward the end of Cassini's close passes of Saturn, the spacecraft began catching the upper edge of the atmosphere. All information had been retrieved from the recorders. Data now was transmitted directly back to Earth, but it relied on the spacecraft's thrusters to stop Cassini from tumbling, keeping its high-gain antenna pointed accurately. probe's final work was sampling the atmosphere and measuring the offset of Saturn's magnetic axis.
This is ACS-1. We just had transition to high rate mode.
In mission control, there was no more control. The engineers could just monitor the signals sent from Saturn 84 minutes previously.
The signal from the spacecraft is gone, and within the next 45 seconds, so will be the spacecraft.
It will take years to process the data gained from Cassini. As yet, there are no future missions to Saturn scheduled. The International Space Station is a laboratory that orbits the Earth once every 90 minutes. It's the most expensive single project ever constructed. Jointly owned and operated by the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan and Canada, the ISS is a triumph of international collaboration. But it didn't start that way. And during its planning phase, it came close to being dumped.
Tonight, I am directing NASA to develop a permanently manned space station and to do it within a decade.
It was 1984, toward the end of the Cold War, when President Ronald Reagan unveiled his plan before the Congress. It was soon called Space Station Freedom, but details were sketchy and plans kept changing. NASA saw a space station as their next logical step. The Space Shuttle had been designed with on-orbit construction as one of its primary functions. On a cold morning in January 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger was being prepared for its 10th flight.
And liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
All 7 astronauts were killed, and the shuttle program was suspended. Just 1 month later, cosmonauts began occupation of Mir, the new Soviet space station. The Soviet Union had a long-standing interest in extended duration space flights with its Salyut space stations. And with Mir, the Russians were gaining valuable experience in microgravity research and on-orbit construction. As the 80s progressed, Mir expanded using modular fabrication techniques. They began experimentation with automated docking systems. New modules were delivered by the Proton launcher with the Progress cargo ship used for resupply. NASA's shuttle fleet remained grounded, while an exhaustive inquiry was conducted, and Space Station Freedom was stuck on the drawing board. In 1989, discontent in Poland spread across the Eastern Bloc, leading to the fall of the wall that had divided Germany. 2 years later, the Soviet Union itself was dissolved, followed by social and economic turmoil. Moscow was now the capital of the Russian Federation, a one-party democracy. The Mir crew EO-10 arrived at the space station as Soviet citizens and would return to the ground as Russians. The country's new space agency, Roscosmos, had had its budget slashed by 80%, and there was no money to launch 2 newly completed modules. In 1988, NASA had resumed shuttle flights. But with the fall of the Soviet Union, interest among US politicians in space station freedom was at an all-time low.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
NASA now began working with Roscosmos. In the Shuttle Mir program, the Russians would benefit from an injection of badly needed funds, and the Americans would gain expertise in long-duration spaceflight. Astronauts learned Russian and began riding to orbit in the Soyuz. Cosmonauts learned English. During the program, 10 cosmonauts flew on the space shuttle, and 8 Americans served as crew members aboard Mir, with the shuttle docking with the Russian space station 9 times. Roscosmos had begun work on a replacement Mir 2 project, completing the functional cargo block and the DOS-8 habitation module, but lack of funding forced the agency to shelve the plan. NASA convinced the cash-strapped Russian Federation to come in on their project. Europe, Japan and Canada were also involved in what was now called the International Space Station. The functional cargo block was renamed Zarya and became the first piece of the International Space Station delivered to orbit in November 1998. Zarya was launched from Kazakhstan with an orbital inclination of around 50 degrees. This set the orbit for the International Space Station. The Space Shuttle would deliver the bulk of the modules from here on. NASA knew that this orbit would give the shuttle problems. Launched from Florida, the shuttle usually orbited at 30 degrees. To reach the steeper inclination with any meaningful payload, the shuttle needed more power, or it had to lose weight. A redesign of the cargo bay delivered some weight savings, but the construction missions could only be achieved with a new external tank made from a new lightweight alloy.
We have a go for main engine start. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of...
2 weeks after the launch of Zarya, the Space Shuttle Endeavour lifted the Unity node to orbit.
Houston's now controlling. Endeavour's rolling on a course heading northeast from the Kennedy Space Center toward a 240-mile-high rendezvous with the Zarya control module.
In preparation, the crew connected the Unity node to the shuttle's airlock, and using the shuttle's robotic arm, they united the 2 modules. The crew entered the space station for the first time and stowed equipment, but no one would take up residence just yet. Construction work had just started. It was 18 months before the arrival of the next module, Zvezda, the Russian habitation module. It docked automatically with the Zarya module. In October 2000, the Space Shuttle Discovery arrived with more pieces. During 4 spacewalks, the crew installed a structural truss and communications equipment. Finally, in November 2000, the first crew, Expedition 1, launched from Baikonur. Cosmonaut Yuri Gidzenko was commander of the Soyuz spacecraft. Astronaut Bill Shepard was the commander of the team once they were on the International Space Station, and Sergei Krikalev, the most experienced member of the crew, was flight engineer. Much of the crew's daily activity was devoted to the unpacking and installation of equipment. There are always problems that need to be solved and maintenance to be carried out. In microgravity, muscles lose tone. One of the first pieces of equipment to be set up was an exercise bike. Every crew member is required to do 2.5 hours of cardio exertion every day. Unlike later missions, Expedition 1 carried out very little scientific research. At this stage, the station's primary laboratory module was still on the ground. But But that would soon change. The crew of the space shuttle Atlantis delivered the laboratory module called Destiny. It was a radical increase in capability for the space station. The laboratory is equipped with 13 international standard payload racks that can house a variety of different experiment modules. But at this stage, they were empty. With the Destiny module and a new, much larger solar array, the International Space Station was taking shape. A precisely organized launch schedule was unfolding, and it was expected that the space station would be complete by 2006. In November of 2002, the Space Shuttle Endeavour took off, carrying the Expedition 6 crew, plus a new piece of the space station's superstructure and 2 tons of supplies. Returning to the ground, no one realized that it would be the last time a cosmonaut would fly on the shuttle, and that construction work on the ISS would be suspended for more than 2 years.
Columbia, Houston, comm check.
When the space shuttle Columbia broke up during re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere, all remaining shuttles were grounded.
Columbia, Houston, UHF, comm check.
81 seconds after launch, foam insulation separating from the external tank had damaged the left wing, and from that point, Columbia was doomed. The investigation board had no confidence that the entire space shuttle fleet could be safely operated for more than a few years, calling the shuttle an aging spacecraft. With shuttle flights suspended, construction work on the International Space Station stopped. Replacement crews were cut to 2 members. The Russian Progress freighter was the only method of delivering supplies to the ISS, and all crew rotations used the Soyuz spacecraft.
Принято 30 секунд, на борту порядок.
What started out as America's space station freedom was now completely reliant upon Russian technology. It would be more than 3 years before construction work on the space station recommenced. In 2004, US President George Bush made a speech to an assembled group of NASA administrators.
Our first goal is to complete the International Space Station by 2010. In 2010, the Space Shuttle, after nearly 30 years of duty, will be retired from service.
The space shuttle would be restricted to work on the International Space Station, where the crew could await rescue if their craft sustained damage. Scientific work was cut to a minimum, with the small crews preoccupied with station maintenance. Fabrication work on the modules continued on the ground. The Space Shuttle Discovery made the return to flight mission in 2005. Before docking with the International Space Station, it performed the rendezvous pitch maneuver, allowing the ISS crew to inspect the craft for damage. It delivered supplies and equipment and returned safely to the ground. Atlantis arrived 14 months later, and after a break of almost 4 years, construction work began again. In what became known to NASA astronauts as the Wall of EVA, that's extravehicular activity, it took 14 more shuttle assembly flights to bring the ISS to its current configuration. If just one of the installation spacewalks was to fail, it could threaten the entire project. The schedule was relentless because the shuttle's days were numbered. Training for these assembly missions was intense. NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory was rigged with a mock-up of the ISS, so astronauts could experience something akin to weightlessness while they practiced. In July 2011, Atlantis flew to the ISS on what was the final flight of the shuttle fleet. The International Space Station was essentially complete, although it continues to be reconfigured and new pieces can still be added. Its 16 pressurized modules have a volume equivalent to a 5-room house, including laboratories, storage spaces, and habitation areas. Power comes from 8 solar array wings, which track the sun. When the ISS enters the Earth's shadow, the solar wings enter night glider mode, where they are angled edge-on to the orbital direction. Though the ISS orbits 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface, there is enough thin atmosphere at that height to present drag. Night glider mode reduces this drag and minimizes orbital decay. Supplies of water, oxygen, food, and equipment are regularly delivered by unmanned cargo craft. Most frequent of these has been the Russian Progress, which is similar in appearance to the Soyuz. It docks by itself using the automated Kurs system. It can also be docked manually if the need should arise. Like the Soyuz capsule, the Progress freighter will remain docked long-term. As well as delivering supplies, it can boost the station's orbit, or it can transfer fuel for the station's thrusters. Ultimately, filled with garbage, it undocks to burn up in the atmosphere. The Japanese space agency, JAXA, currently operates the largest cargo craft that still visits the ISS. To dock with the space station, it approaches in stages until it's close enough to be grabbed by the robotic arm and connected to one of the berths on the Harmony node. It has a pressurized zone that can be unloaded by hand, and there's an unpressurized area, accessed by the robotic arm, for cargo to be stored on pallets outside. With the demise of the space shuttle, NASA has turned to the private sector to fulfill its resupply commitments. The Cygnus freighter first visited the ISS in 2014. The SpaceX Dragon cargo craft first delivered supplies to the ISS in 2012. It is different from the other cargo craft in that it can return significant loads back to the ground. Experimental materials from the ISS can be in an Earth-based laboratory within 2 days of leaving low Earth orbit. SpaceX is developing a Dragon capable of carrying astronauts to low Earth orbit. The business of the International Space Station is research. The study of fluid dynamics and material science in a microgravity environment simply cannot be done on the ground, and the orbiting platform is the perfect place for Earth observation, meteorological studies, and astronomy. The study of plant development in microgravity is of great interest. One of the major areas of study is into the effects of prolonged weightlessness on the human body. Without the resistance provided by gravity, muscles and bone deteriorate. This is partially offset by regular exercise. The ISS is equipped with a treadmill, a cycle ergometer, and a resistive exercise device. All are shock-mounted so as not to pass vibration across the station. The loss of bone mass shows up as raised calcium levels in the blood. Blood samples are taken regularly and stored at low temperature for later analysis. The extra calcium can lead to kidney stones. NASA and JAXA are cooperating in the study of an agent that can prevent these effects. Most astronauts on long-term missions complain about deterioration in their vision, which can persist for years after a flight. Distinct changes to the eye have been detected, and ultrasound examinations of the eyes are done regularly. Astronauts and cosmonauts are totally reliant upon the technology of the ISS, and it needs regular maintenance. In August 2018, a small but steady drop in air pressure was noticed. It was traced to the Soyuz MS-9 capsule. A 2mm hole appeared to have been deliberately drilled, and nasty rumors about sabotage began to spread. Cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev made a recording from the Soyuz to show the repairs and to quash stories about poor morale on the space station.
As you see, everything is calm. We're living in harmony as always, and all the experiments are going to plan.
Later, it was decided that a spacewalk to cut away some of the external insulation from the Soyuz above the hull might deliver more clues about how the hull could have been made. Because the Soyuz capsule is not designed for external maintenance and lacks handrails, it was a challenging job for the cosmonauts. It was difficult slicing through the 8 layers of the thermal blanket used to stabilize internal temperatures on the spacecraft. From the inside, it appeared that the hole had been repaired with glue, which gave out after the Soyuz had docked with the ISS. It was thought that analysis of the glue would shed more light on the mystery. Because the hole was in the habitation module, it was no threat to the craft's safe return. The blanket, which was left in a mess, is also not required during re-entry.
Now I see it, Moscow.
Russian cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev, European astronaut Alexander Gerst, and American astronaut Serena Agnon-Chancellor had flown up on this spacecraft and would be returning home on it.
Cut the visible portion.
When maintenance or repair work has to be done outside the ISS on NASA, ESA or JAXA modules, the crew members with the required expertise have training in the use of the American spacesuit, known as the EMU. Some crew members have training on the EMU and the Russian all-land spacesuit. Those with experience in both say that the American suit is more flexible and comfortable, yet it is very complex and takes a very long time to put on. By contrast, the Russian suit is simple to put on and is designed to be easily serviced by cosmonauts. Even the smallest equipment malfunction can be life-threatening. When ESA astronaut Luca Parmitano was installing cables outside the ISS, water started leaking into his helmet.
I feel a lot of water on the back of my head, but I don't think it's leaked from my back. Are you sweating? Are you working hard? I am sweating, but it feels like a lot of water.
Mission Control called him back inside, but by the time he had reached the airlock, he couldn't see and he couldn't hear. His colleagues quickly got him inside and removed his helmet, along with more than a liter of water. Later, the empty suit was powered up and the fault was obvious. The water was leaking from the suit's cooling system. A report blamed Mission Control, who assumed that the water was coming from the in-suit drinking water bag. A crew will typically stay in orbit for around 6 months. The arrival of a new crew means that for 3 other crew members, their stay is coming to an end. They board the same Soyuz craft in which they traveled to orbit for the return to the surface. Undocking of the capsule is precisely timed. It separates initially by the spring mechanism in the docking interface. Only at a safe distance from the ISS will the Soyuz make the first of its separation burns to avoid contaminating the space station. At a point in the orbit opposite to their intended landing area, the retroburn happens, slowing the craft for its descent into the atmosphere. This burn is precisely timed and lasts 4 minutes and 45 seconds. At this stage, the descent capsule is still attached to the habitation and instrument modules. In Kazakhstan, a fleet of ground vehicles are heading for the landing zone. Medical teams and recovery personnel from Roscosmos, NASA and ESA are also in the air. Explosive bolts fire to separate the 3 parts of the Soyuz. During the heat of re-entry, the crew are out of radio contact with the ground. In the upper atmosphere, the drogue chute deploys, further slowing the capsule. And then the main chute. On the ground, the crew are lifted from the capsule. They're experiencing gravity for the first time in months, and it will take them months to return to normal. They are carried through the snow and will soon return to their homes.